immigrants probably do it better than most people, I would think, rather than, the general population. And probably because they're more aware. If you look at the older people in your community, a lot of them are still wearing sports coats, right? When they're 90 years old going to, a cultural event. Whereas that's not necessarily the case with people who've been here for generations.
Welcome to a new episode of Community in Arabic Season 2, sponsored by Lipton Yellow Label. I'm so excited today to be chatting with Don Khoury. Don is a very exciting business development executive, an expert in nonverbal communication. Don has an amazing history in being a great executive, a great coach, and a great consultant. He recently exited a successful business from Lebanese heritage, grew up in Canada and then moved to the US. We would love to chat with him about his expertise in nonverbal communication. He was a speaker in multiple venues and a consultant. Don, thank you so much for meeting with us.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So Don, as we were chatting before the episode, media, both written and visual, often portrays immigrants and then to a higher degree refugees very unfavorably and often in a negative way, which in turn shape a narrative about who are immigrants and refugees, and then it reflects negatively on us as individuals. So we wanted to hear from your experience as a nonverbal communications expert about how can we as individuals better that narrative and reshape that image that's drawn about us. So we're really excited for the chat today.
How was your quarantine time and the COVID-19 era?
Pretty good. I had to quarantine for one period of time. I didn't have it, but I had to quarantine because I'd had a close contact. But it hasn't been that bad.
So Don, going back to your background, you are of Lebanese heritage. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and about your journey coming here?
Sure. So I grew up in Eastern Canada in a town called Fredericton, which is, roughly 50,000 people, but it has a couple of universities. So it was a fairly culturally diverse community. And there were about 500 people in the Lebanese community in that town. And over half of them probably came from the village that my family came from. So it was very much, we all knew each other, and it was a great place, an idyllic place to grow up. I ended up going to university and then down here, actually, in the United States, and then went home to Canada, worked for Xerox for a number of years, had some success there, then met an American at an alumni function and ended up moving back down here and doing my MBA and, continuing to work either in consulting or for other organizations in business development sales positions.
So, growing up as a child from an immigrant family, when did you start developing your passion to communication and nonverbal communication?
So I think probably there's some roots to my childhood. My grandfather worked in a shoe factory that made high-end shoes, so I love high-end shoes. And my father was always very conscious of how he dressed and how he presented himself. And so from a young age, I modeled a lot of these things. And then, I started reading more and more about it. And I came across some research that actually was done at MIT that suggested or showed that how you dress and how you present yourself is a bigger indicator of whether you're going to get venture capital funding than what's in your actual presentation. And they called what was called a target effect. And so I looked at, well, if there's a target, for whatever reason, I thought, well, there's a target effect on investors. There's also got to be a target effect on voters and how politicians affect voter decisions. And so I just did, a lot of research into that and came up with an algorithm that predicted the elections.
Yeah, and that algorithm was successful, 97% prediction rate. So which was actually fantastic. I mean,
it's down about 95 right now, but we're trying to learn, bring it back to a higher number. Yeah.
I mean, I would still call 95% a huge success. All right. So Don, if we can backtrack just a little bit and talk about, what is a nonverbal communication, how to define it and just what it is.
So a lot of people think nonverbal communication, they think of body language, and body language is a part of it, right? But it's also how we appear. It's how we control the environment around us, or not necessarily control it or understand it or be able to read the environment and how we want to position ourselves in that. There are also things that we can do to help amplify our communication, but there are also things that we can't do. So to be able to understand how someone is communicating in ways that they can't control it, but what that says about them in the communication. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the importance of it, but what do you think the importance of it in terms of approaching business and professional life versus, let's say, public servant as a politician?
The interesting thing is I think politicians have understood how to communicate in a way that's most effective. And business leaders, I think, need to learn a lot from the politicians and how they communicate to best influence the audience you're trying to influence. And so, again, I often say what politicians know, business leaders need to learn to be able to better influence their message.
That's actually a great segue to our next question. What is it that politicians do better? I mean, you have more of an interest in analyzing politicians, so what is it that you find them doing better than the average person on one level and then business leaders on another level?
I think they focus much more on their dress as it relates to persuasion or influence versus style. And there is a difference between style and persuasion. And so I think what you'll find with politicians, if you look at them, again, they're more focused on influence and persuasion. And I don't know that business people actually think about that very much in terms of when they're presenting themselves.
Kind of relying the message you want to deliver with, how you deliver it and then how you dress and how you communicate it.
Right, and the credibility that can afford.
Some politicians, they pay an expert to pick for them the amount of tear and wear and tear their shoes has to have. Like,
absolutely.
Depending on the crowd they address. If they go to businessmen, if they go to factory workers, they pick the shoes with the right amount of level of shininess and wear and tear to relay that message. Imagine that.
Oh yeah, no, it can be very detailed, and even to, again, it's how they present themselves, it's how they dress, it's how they have people around them, right? So you'll often see politicians with people who are perfectly ethnically weighted to the population of the United States. You've got everything, young, old, every diaspora is represented. It doesn't happen by accident. It's created on purpose.
No, that's a great thing. I was listening to your TED Talk from a few years ago about, the message that politicians deliver. And then you said that people they make a decision emotionally and then they backtrack and try to kind of put a reason into the decision they've already made emotionally, like whether they realize it or not.
Absolutely. And whether it's buying a car, right? You really only need a car with 4 wheels, a luxury vehicle, and you'll justify it with reason in your mind. And it's the same thing with people, right? We will instinctually see somebody when they walk in the room and we'll make a number of different judgments. I mean, you can look at somebody and ask questions. You take 2 people and say, okay, which one is a Republican? Which one smokes marijuana? Which one does, and you can make those decisions. Now, whether it's true or not, you're going to make those decisions based on how they appear.
These kind of details, very interesting to me when you look at the presidential debate and you see how, for example, the Democrats and Republicans, they change their attire color or tie to kind of relate to the opposite party in terms of blue or red or something like that. What's the main predictors to you when analyzing a certain campaign or certain approach that would say, hey, that's this happened, meaning yes, he's going to make it?
Well, it's interesting. I used to capture a number of what I called positive attributes and negative attributes in terms of how they communicated nonverbally. And it was around 35 on each side. And then I met a great professor named Dr. Chotan Basu at the University of Wisconsin. And he took all of my score sheets and, with a couple of other professors and looked at it. And what he was able to come up with, that only 3 of the things that I was capturing mattered. And they were all what I would call negative and unconscious. So these were things that people weren't necessarily purposely communicating, right? So, and it related mostly to honesty. So although the appearance matters, people are going to make judgments. As the debate goes on, they are going to whether they realize what they're picking up or not, they're going to reason and put evidence towards the decisions that they've already made based on how honest the politician is.
What I hear you say here is, I will be making my decision or like my perception of you emotionally, and you'll be delivering a message, unintentionally to me through the way you communicate. So there's a lot of unintentions going both ways, where both people are making a judgment without realizing that this is the judgment they're making.
Right. If their judgment of you and then the way you communicate, unconsciously afterwards are in conflict, people will then not like that person. Right. And so that's why the honest communication matters more than anything else, because you can't control the level of truthfulness that's communicated. So you just have to be truthful.
And how do you think that truthfulness or that message that is professionally relied by politicians can be implemented in, for example, I have a business or I have a social media appearance. How can I relay that message to my audience?
It's that honesty piece. So there are things you can control, how you dress, how you've been trained to move your hands. But then there's also just being honest, because that is going to bring both of those things together. Again, if people see a difference between what you're saying and then what your body is saying, they react with displeasure, and then they're seeking clarification. If they don't get the clarification, they're going to either act hostilely or withdraw from the situation. And so again, it's just so important to just be honest.
Like you said, you walk into the room and then you already have a perception about the person, across the room from you. And in this case, it can be, us as immigrants, right? There's always a perception of who you are. And then, what is it that we have to be aware of? Walking into the room, knowing that more likely than not, the other person has some sort of perception about us, to be able to kind of, start from a good place with them, kind of try to erase whatever, perceptions they have and start it on an individual candid base.
People say familiarity breeds contempt. Well, I think familiarity breeds friendship, right? And there's an interesting psychological concept called the fundamental attribution error. And so the less we know somebody, the more we are apt to judge them. And anything negative that happens to them, we're going to judge to their character, and anything positive to the environment. The more we learn and break bread with these people, right, or other people with us, that reverses. So anything positive that happens to them, we attribute to their character, and then anything negative we attribute to environmental factors. And so that's the idea, I think, that matters more than anything else, is creating that familiarity.
When I think about it as you say it, it's so true that we do this without realizing, and you see somebody and then you start thinking of, what in his environment made him or her successful before thinking what in their personality that made them, successful. But then the better you know them, you start actually making reasons why they are the ones that bring the success, not the environment. That's really fascinating to think about.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just one of the things that makes sense, but you never think about it until you hear it, and then you're like, oh, wow, this makes perfect sense,
So, and again, so to that point, that's why the nonverbal behavior or nonverbal communication is so important in the beginning, but less important at the end. So if I have a business person I want to go meet with, I better be wearing a suit. Now, after I met with them 10 times and I need them to sign something and I'm on my way to the golf course, I can show up in my shorts, but I can't show up in my shorts in the first meeting, right? Because they're going to kick me out of there.
I actually really agree with that. And I find it fascinating in my industry, and I'm in commercial real estate. You often see people who are, high-powered people, they're market movers, and then they show up to meetings and I'm like, how are you wearing like khakis to your meeting? Like, how is this okay? And how are people have so much respect and everybody is paying attention to what they say, paying attention to their behavior and their opinion about the market? And then, it makes sense that they've built such a strong image that image is not the deciding factor anymore. Is that a good assumption? Yeah.
So it's most important early on rather than later. Absolutely. Yeah.
To that idea, when you see big tech executives in Silicon Valley, they're wearing T-shirts all the time, like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, they just wear their gray or black T-shirt all the time, wherever they go. To them, I was reading a report, like they want to minimize the amount of decisions they make per day, because to them they make 2 or 3 main decisions every day. That's it. like for us, general public, we do, 50 to 100 decisions per day. But for them, they make these 2-3 main decisions. So one less decision of what should I wear. That's for them. That's the best case scenario.
Well, the interesting thing about Mark Zuckerberg is when he's in Silicon Valley, he's wearing a T-shirt or a hoodie. But if you Google him before Congress, he's wearing a suit, right? So the environment matters, right?
Knowing your audience, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This interesting part of the nonverbal communication and the correlation with the verbal communication. So let's say to me, I want to convey a big idea to you, or I want to convey a small idea to you. So in your opinion, is it that much common that people trying to relay an idea verbally, but non-verbally they're failing?
In a lot of cases, that's going to happen. Even in your industry, right? In the medical field, they've done studies where the vocal pitch and tone of the doctor when he's delivering something, people are more apt to follow the prescription if a doctor speaks in a certain way versus the other. And that's nothing to do with their qualifications. It has everything to do with, their vocal pitch and tone. So those things matter.
In your experience, and you come from an immigrant family, you're surrounded by a big community. What are some traits that you see, or some things that you see immigrants often failing to do in their body language and how they portray themselves that needs to be better?
Immigrants probably do it better than most people, I would think, rather than the general population. And probably because they're more aware, right? And if you look at the older people in your community, in immigrant communities, a lot of them are still wearing sports coats, right? When they're 90 years old, going to a cultural event. Whereas that's not necessarily the case with people who've been here for generations. So I think that immigrants probably do it better. It's been my experience anyway, in what I've seen.
To you, who's the master or the high-skilled communicator that you can point out?
Probably Bill Clinton would be, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, Obama during his 2008 campaign. There's a number that do it very well. There's a governor, former governor of Washington State, Christine Gregoire, who was also a very good communicator. And I think that lends to people just wanting to be around them.
I was watching a report that pointing out at somebody is, considered aggressive, but he used to do it this way. So this way, your palm is closed, but at the same time, you kind of pointing out, but not in an aggressive way.
So closing your thumb, or your finger and thumb together. These are authoritative but not aggressive, whereas this is aggressive. And so you can say, this is how we need to do it, and people aren't going to put their back against the wall, right? Versus this is how we need to do it.
Exactly.
I'm thinking of how many times I did this not knowing how aggressive I'm coming across. So if we were to think about this, is there anything that comes to mind that people often do that they shouldn't do? Just say 1, 2, 3. People often do these things and they're pretty bad.
Well, again, I think the pointing is a bad one. Not building rapport with people ahead of time, right? So a lot of times, in trainings that I do, I talk about starting the conversation from your body and moving out. So if you build that rapport by starting in and moving out, then you can come in, you can then move into more definitive gesturing, right, at the end. Because if you come in right away and start doing the definitive gesturing, people are going to be put off. So you need to build that rapport with the audience.
Like now we're in the podcast world, like all this form of media communication, these short videos, stuff like that. Where do you see the nonverbal communication going into the future?
Well, I think it matters just like it would matter in any other place, right? I was commenting on the rug you guys have. It's a really nice rug. I'd even have that in the frame. It comes across as very regal, right? Yeah. I like that.
I hope it's showing, Sebastian. We were trying to be actually mindful of the set, and we had a lot of discussion within the team of how we switch from season 1 to season 2 to say, okay, we are a community podcast, so we're actually thinking about what is our, our studio conveying about us being a community, and how can we make it more like, so we just decided to be on the couch, be at home, and just do it from our home to our audiences.
And that creates a level of intimacy, I think, that's important, right? If you were sitting behind a mock-up of a TV studio, it wouldn't be as intimate.
Right.
You look at the Young Turks, right? They create a less of an intimate conversation with the community.
And that again to the familiarity and the honesty, right?
Yeah.
Going a full circle, trying to kind of show them that, hey, we're communicating with you from a home setting, just a community podcast and a show, and we want to talk about interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. You got me thinking about, one of the biggest examples, I think, of the power of nonverbal communication are pharma commercials on TV. So you see these people smiling and happy and doing all these things, but the words that are actually being said, you shouldn't do this if you have this, it could cause this, could cause that. But nobody's listening to the words. They're seeing the images and they're like, oh, I got to go get a prescription for that. Right.
That's exactly right. I mean, now I'm thinking about it, like somebody is walking in springtime and all smiling, and then this can cause you a heart attack, a stroke, possible death. Call your doctor.
Actually, one of our team members works on all this like pharma ads. So
okay.
So what would be an advice that you would offer for, let's just say, younger immigrants, you just came here, you're trying to break your way through and trying to portray the right image about yourself to just make your way here in this country?
I think how you dress is probably the most important thing, because the first impression and how you walk in the room is crucial. And one of the things that you had said about the shoes, I would rather have a $500 suit and $1,000 pair of shoes than a $3,000 suit and a $100 pair of shoes, because people are going to look at your shoes first. And
right.
Not only they better be nice shoes, but they better be well kept, right? Mm-hmm. Unless you're going into a factory and you're a politician, and you should wear work boots, right? I mean, that context matters as well.
Exactly.
Right. When I was thinking about it, I'm thinking of something. If you meet a number of people that, come from different ethnic groups or different kind of backgrounds, or are perceived as coming from different backgrounds, wouldn't you judge them differently based on their look and how their look is associated with like their ethnicity or their race or where they come from?
Oh, I think there's a lot of that in the beginning, for sure. People are going to make judgments just by seeing you. But then again, once you have that familiarity, the importance of those other factors lessens more and more the more familiar you become with somebody, right? But to your point, I mean, there are certainly cultural things that have been put out there that are going to judge. People are going to be unfairly judged. Right. And it's also a regional thing, right? If you look at different regions of the country, in the Northeast or in the Boston area where I am, people aren't as judging, and I think it's more because of the familiarity, and everybody went to school together here because all the universities are here, right?
Right. That's one of the things I love about being, in Chicago and in New York and Montreal and all of like the big cities is, like I said, we're kind of familiar. It's like such a diverse place where you're less likely to be judged, you're more likely to blend in. It's just like the greatness
how
of being
open
here.
and international is the city is, the more it communicates. That's really something to think about moving forward. How to dress, how to present yourself, the different settings, and I mean that was a really interesting conversation to now start noticing these stuff on people and kind of tell how you approach every situation is in a special way. So thank you so much, Don, for this interesting conversation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We really enjoyed the conversation. It's very mind-provoking. So I'm sure audience are going to be like Googling, looking through their old pictures and be like, I cannot believe I did this. I cannot believe I showed up to an interview wearing this or doing that. So that's really interesting. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.